Okay, Tom, as and when you are ready. We're going to go live, everybody. Please switch your phones to silent. And I really hope everyone's gone to the toilet. Okay, so... Oh, I just need to check. Yeah, there we go. Right, this is the bit on the stream that everybody loves, where they're basically just watching me awkwardly walk around, waiting to do my little bit. But now we're ready! Hooray! Okay, so welcome to We Move session 10, which is going to be with Jess Bartlett, who you will see here to my right. And today's session is going to be about data sonification. If you've never come across a We Move event before, then we're just so delighted that you've chosen to join us today. We Move is a series of seminars that are dedicated to music and technology, curated by Music Hackspace, that spotlights experts who are women and gender minority. And we'll be running lots of these sessions between, well, we've done a few of them now, so you can go on YouTube and watch them all, but between now and mid-July. And now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Jess, who's going to host our session today. So Jess is, well, number one, excellent. I have that experience firsthand, and because we share a studio. But she also, she is a producer and a researcher and an all-round excellent human. She originally trained as a pharmacist, which I didn't know until recently, often slipping back into the music rooms to play piano between lectures. And she now works for the University of Cambridge. And I will get her to talk about that rather than me to talk about that at some point, because I won't do it very well. But she also works as a producer called Island Fox and a mixing engineer. And she's passionate about innovation and technology and sound. And so I will now let her talk more about herself, because she'll do a better job. And so, yes, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Yes, hi everyone, lovely to meet you. It's so nice to have lots of friendly, smiley faces in the room. So yeah, Jen has already given quite a bit of an intro about me, but I currently work at the University of Cambridge part-time. I work in public engagement, so it's basically coming up with creative ways to bring research to different groups of people. And then I also work as a musician and a producer. So my interest in data sonification is kind of like these two things combined. It just seems like a natural interest for me. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about some opportunities in this space, some careers and things that you might think about that you could do these kind of things in. But I know we have lots of UAL CCI people here. My background, full disclosure, is not in computational arts. It's in research and that kind of data and those kind of projects and that landscape, so funding and those sorts of things. So so a bit about data sonification. In its most basic form, data sonification is data conveyed as sound. It's also a cross between research, sound design, music psychology, storytelling, sociology, and also computational musicology more recently. Typically, we call a sonification something that has been made into human hearing range, so 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And generally speaking, a data sonification is non-speech audio. Although I don't know why, because there are some projects, which I'm going to talk about later, which use lyrics and vocals and things to sonify data as well. So what kinds of data could you sonify? Well, actually, there's, like, the world is your oyster in this sense, and I hope actually that people come away and they want to think about turning some different types of data into projects themselves. But broadly speaking, we split data into two categories. There's qualitative data, so data that has to be described in terms of words. So, for example, how you all got here today, or how you all came to UAL today. You may have taken the tube, you may have walked, you may have taken the bus. That's all valid data, but it's not numerical. So quantitative data is data that is described in terms of numbers, so age, height, currency, those kind of things. Broadly speaking, if you want to do a great sonification project with data, emotional data works really well. An individual data point works well or a data set which you can map the parameters to also works well and changes over time. Like sound can be a really good change in time. So those sorts of things can work quite well. I just thought we'd just dive straight into one so you can see it and hear it with your own ears and eyes. So this is from KQED. They have taken 300 years of climate data. The high-pitched sound that you can hear is the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere changing over time. The lower, plucky synth sound, which changes also in intensity over time, is the temperature of the Earth. So let's have a listen to this. Just going to hop ahead like 100 years or so. Okay. It's getting closer and closer to where we are now in the timeline. Yeah, so basically it's a really nice sonification that kind of has an impact that if you read that data, if that was visualized purely just on a graph, you wouldn't get that same feeling. And I don't know about you, but when I first heard that and saw that, I found it quite uncomfortable. But that's the whole point, is that actually when you turn something into art, it creates a sort of emotional response in people that actually maybe research might not. So I would like you all, so there's various tasks throughout this presentation. So if I could get you, like in your rows, basically, just have a think about what benefits might there be to using sound and music in research. So just in your rows, 5 minutes, feel free to hop on this row, or on this row, whichever you prefer. And online too, just write it in the group. Thank you. I want to hear some people's ideas as well. What are you thinking? Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. Aesthetics, yeah, could do, yeah. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's true actually. Like for some reason, sonification seemed to really like hit the press much more readily than like a data visualization. I think it just still feels quite novel as well. Like it still has that kind of novel factor. There was an article in The Guardian about like a couple that had like sonified their baby in the womb and then used the ECG to like make as an electronic signal to basically make music out of it, and it was like big news in The Guardian. But you can imagine if that happened in a visualization, The Guardian would probably be like, no, it shouldn't be in there. Like, so it still kind of hits that spot. Nice. Yeah, okay, I'm going to hear some other groups. What are you guys thinking?
Well, it depends on if it's a member of the conference
Yeah.
The main benefit of, in my eyes, of sonifying research is that it allows members of the general public who maybe aren't in the research field, in the field of research, to actually understand what data's saying. So, for example, the climate change thing. I know that climate deniers are just a whole wacky group of people, but potentially if YouTube, or they'd like to deny data all the time. If you can like show them like that, something like that, then there's potential to actually change a few minds.
Yeah,
Some people in
it's
that group.
still, it has the feeling, doesn't it? I feel like art has this feeling attached to it in a way that people kind of interact with art to know themselves better. And so, like, I think in that sense, those sorts of things, like general public can really take a lot from it.
Like with accessibility.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
these guys make something
Yeah.
who is live,
Yeah.
can see any portrait which makes data look nice. Maybe you can just make them listen to this or any other kind of data. Maybe they could understand a bit more what's happening. And then
Yeah.
goes around accessibility and just taking that data to people who cannot understand.
Yeah. I think, and the interesting thing about accessibility is, like, there's the more obvious groups, like people, for example, that can't see, then maybe you want to think about, okay, how can they interact and understand something? But then there's actually much wider than that. There's a lot of, like, different groups of people and what's important to them, and then creating something that could feed into that as well. So, yeah, have a think about that. What kind of groups of people might be, like, important? I'm gonna hop onto this group. I'll leave you think about it. Yeah. Where are we at? What have we got on our list of?
Just talking about accessibility.
Yes. Yeah.
Much easier it is and more interesting for the consumer to get the data. The recipient of the research.
And how it feels more concrete and like you remember something concrete.
Yeah.
And how much easier it is to use within media.
Yeah, I was talking about that with the first group actually, that Sonification still has this like real novelty factor about it, that data visualization feels like it's just that bit more established. So data sonification projects can hit, like we're talking about, there was an article in The Guardian about a couple that had like sonified their baby's ECG in the womb, and it hit like The Guardian, and I was like, well, it probably wouldn't if that was like a data visualization. It would just be like another person having a baby, you know. So it's quite interesting that it still has that slight more novelty factor to it as well. Yeah. Keep thinking. There's more. There's more. I promise. Yeah. What kind of ideas have we got in this group?
Okay, some nice responses.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to hear some of your sort of things have you thought about.
We've got about
benefits.
20 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so
Interesting. Thank you.
Sound is like a language that everyone to a degree understands. It kind of stimulates some similar emotion.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Hold that thought. Okay. Okay, everyone. Thanks so much. Let's move on and talk about some of these. So I think nearly everyone talked about accessibility and also thinking about like the emotional side of art and music and how that can be helpful in terms of data. But I just want to go through some various different things because there might be some things that you haven't actually considered. So actually, the more senses that people use in an experience, typically the more memorable that experience is. So actually, if you're looking at something, you're listening to something, and then you're touching something or eating something at the same time, then actually that makes that whole experience more memorable. Something that I don't think anyone here talked about is that actually music can be used by researchers and scientists to actually identify patterns in terms of the structure of various things. So I want to show you an example. This is by Marcus Buehler, who is a researcher at MIT. And he basically he calls himself a material musician, and he works on the spike protein of coronavirus. So this is a protein that causes the infection in our body. And what he did was he took that protein and all of its individual building blocks, which are amino acids, And they basically line up in a sequence, and then that also folds, and then that eventually causes forms a protein. So he took that sequence and basically sonified it, with the idea that what that means is that you can start to hear patterns in that protein. Then you might actually find parts of that protein that you could target for a vaccine. So you're actually listening to how you might target a protein. So let's listen to it so you can hear the amino acids. And if I zoom in, so you can hear that there's sort of like different sections in that protein. I think the only thing that I feel about this is that he could have made it sound a bit more unpleasant, because coronavirus generally is not like a great thing. But also, so music and sound is a great storytelling tool. I don't know if anyone's ever experimented a bit if they watch a film and they take the sound away, or if you've seen any of those funny videos where you play different music over like a certain part of that film, and it gives a completely different feel to that film. So I want to test this with you and see if anyone knows where this piece of music is from, and specifically what kind of things are happening at that point in the film, and like a bit more about the feeling of the music and stuff. So let me know if you recognize this piece of music, and specifically where. You know, Jen. Does anyone know?
Is it March of the Ents, or is it?
You're close. Yeah. Yeah, it's the birth of the Uruk-hai in Lord of the Rings. But yeah, very basically the same kind of thing. But it's interesting because you hear those different, you literally hear the theme of the Uruk-hai, and then every time that comes up, you know that they're around. So, and they're about to do something probably pretty awful. So yeah, it just feels like a battle, doesn't it? Like the kettle drums, the way that there's like these really strong French horns and stuff. So it kind of sets the scene a lot more than maybe people think when they're watching something. It's actually the sound telling a huge part of that story as well. I think you all came up with accessibility. So actually Spotify's main core audience is 18 to 25-year-olds. So if you're just releasing stuff onto Spotify and Apple and those sorts of things, then you can reach that group. Visually impaired, I think some people mentioned this group. There's a great film called Notes on Blindness. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's a writer, John Hull, and he basically is gradually losing his eyesight. And he talks about going outside for the first time when it's raining, and he can actually see again. It's really, really lovely film. Patient groups. So in certain groups like Alzheimer's, music can help with memory. So it's used a lot in that. And also cultural groups, so different types of music from all around the world can be a nice way to introduce an idea to certain groups of people. If you've got something, research and data set that you want to introduce to a very specific cultural group. Music releases dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical in the brain. So it can be a really nice way to deliver a message maybe that isn't so nice if you have like something feel-good along with it. And actually there's this really, really cool project by an artist called Esperanza Spalding. I don't know, are there any Bjork fans in here? I love her, so yeah, okay, good, lots of people. Yeah, she's kind of like in a similar kind of vein. So she released a project last year called the Songwriter's Apothecary Lab, where she basically collaborated with well-being researchers and practitioners, other musicians, and each song has its own kind of like function that it's supposed to help with, and then it also has its own ingredients, so we can listen to a bit of this. This is form Form Whaler 1, which is the first song on the album. It's such a cool album, honestly. You should go and listen to it. But yeah, it's interesting because they also used all of these sort of unusual well-being research kind of elements to it as well. So there's that, and then there's also these quirky kind of like Indian ragas and things that are mixed in there. So yeah, really interesting, and a lot more information on her website as well if you're interested in that project. Yeah, we also talked a lot about like the emotional impact of music. And like how people basically interact with music and art, and it brings them closer to themselves. It kind of reminds them of how human they are. So it moves us. You know, we listen to things that make us cry, that make us laugh, that make us dance. But also, interestingly, so Spotify has cottoned on to this, and it uses all of that emotional data from the population and sells it to banks and other places, because it basically gives all of these places an idea of how the whole population is feeling at any given point. So it's actually a really valuable set of data in itself. And lastly, I thought we could just do a Radio 6 time capsule. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this, and then I'm not going to play too much, so I don't want to give too much away. But if you could have a think about what decade it might be from, and I'll be even more impressed if you can tell me the year itself. So let's have a listen. Does anyone know? Did you say?
Yeah, it's the Beatles.
Right, yeah. So what kind of decade might that be? Yeah, 60s. Does anyone know the exact year?
63.
Also close, 64. Yeah. But basically, it's interesting because when you hear it, not only did you recognise straight away that's the sound of the Beatles, but it's also, you hear the technology of that time. So the fact that they recorded everything on just like tape, basically, and they had these two tape machines that they basically just layered everything over and over and over again. So it's quite interesting, actually, because some of their songs actually have audible mistakes baked into them. And there's quite a famous one, I think, on YouTube of Hey Jude, where you can hear one of them saying, "Oh shit," or something, which is quite funny. But it's just interesting that they're sort of like, they're really important, actually, that music and sound can be a really important document of time and place. Like if you hear a speech that's from a certain time and place. So lots of different reasons why you might want to use music and sound. Just really quickly, we won't have as long on this one, just a couple of minutes. But in your row, can you think of any examples of data sonification, like in our lives, just generally, as we're going about our lives? So, a couple of minutes, have a chat. Okay, I'm going to come round. I'm going to start with this group first. I want to hear some thoughts. I came last to you before, so yeah. What are you thinking? Yeah, that is. Yeah, because it's like the signal that you've got something, and then the sound that is the change, isn't it? The sound is the I've got a message now data. Oh, that's it.
For example, just like the bells from a church ringing, could that be considered data sonification?
That's a really, really good question. I would say that I would need to, to be honest, to answer that accurately, I would need to double check. My gut is saying that it doesn't have to be digital, because if it's any kind of data and you're sonifying it, you could, because you could play drums along with something, and that's not digital, but you're still sonifying that data. Thank you. But it's just because of everything is so electronic now, with how people make music and being able to simulate instruments really accurately through that process. Does anyone here produce music, or you do? Yeah. So things like on work, what software do you use? Yeah, me too. So plugins and those sorts of things, basically. It's all now you can get something that sounds really like an actual instrument, and it's really, really good. But yeah, it doesn't have to be digital. I guess also, if you've got a really hefty data set that you're doing a lot of processing in, depending on what software you're using to do that actual sonification itself, then it's maybe more likely to be digital. Because if you're doing because everyone here is computational, but if you're doing something much more computational, then it's probably going to end up being more digital. But if you're doing something which is just written on score, then it's probably not necessarily going to be digital. So it probably depends on the platform that you're using as well. Yeah, cool, right. I feel like I've probably used up all my time. Okay, it's fine. Cool. Thanks so much, everyone. I'd love to hear any examples that people have come up with. I know this group came up with at least one. Yeah.
You'll have to repeat them from the stream, by the way, because the words they can't be heard.
Okay.
Or you can grab it.
Well, okay. Yeah. I shall. There you go. Sorry. Yeah.
Heart rate monitors?
Yes. Yeah. ECG. Yeah, you could. Because each time you're hearing the actual heartbeat itself on the monitor as well. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
So I saw an artwork before. So someone who took some pictures in real life, then got some spots from the picture. Then they turned those spots into different sounds, like higher or lower.
Yeah, I mean, I
C or
guess
E or
that sounds like it could be its own project, really. But I'm also interested in just if you're just kind of generally doing life, how are there examples you can think of too? I think this group had one. Sorry, I volunteered you, but yeah.
I think we said phone notifications or...
Yeah,
Clocks
calling
as
and
well.
if someone's calling you and you hear that phone call. Yeah, exactly. Lots of different examples. I'll just give a couple more examples, basically. I don't know if anyone recognises this. Oh, oops, sorry. This is a Geiger counter. So it's basically used to monitor radiation. The more noisy something is, the more radiation there is. A clock. Yeah. So we call this an auditory icon because it's the sound of the real life thing that it's representing. And then this is one that kind of bugs me because actually a lot of crossings have started taking the sound of the green man out. And I don't know about you, but I actually cross the road from listening to it rather than looking at the green man, which is... Anyway. So here's another example. This is an earcon because it's saying it's safe to cross the road, but the sound itself is much more abstract. It's like a bleep and bloop sort of sound. So I'll just talk about some different types of sonification. So very sort of known sonification, probably some of the most known sonification is audification. And that is just converting electrical signal into human hearing. So near all electronic music is audification. So using synths, or if you're using MIDI keyboards or those sorts of things. Also, if you're doing any kind of more quirky projects, like when you see people plugging in fruit and then creating sound like from fruit, it's the voltage and that electrical signal that then you can hear. So that's audification. So auditory icons, so like the clock that we just saw. Also, if you're like emptying your trash on your computer and then you kind of hear the sound of emptying the trash. Earcons are like more abstract or musical. So these are used a lot by brands. So if I sung da 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 da, would you know who? Anyone know? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's always one, isn't there? Yeah, so McDonald's. Yeah, so you recognize it. I mean, the parameter mapping, as I said, is probably what the vast majority of people associate with data sonification. So if you have a data set, for example, and then in that entire data set, you're trying to map all of those individual data points to something into sound. And then lastly, quite an interesting sonification that maybe a lot of people don't think about is that you can create visual models out of sound. So if you think about this in a much higher and lower frequency, then people use ultrasound to see their babies for the first time. And people use things like sonar to be able to navigate like underwater or navigate in the ocean or in the sea. But it's used a lot in architecture, it's used a lot in gaming, in VR, in AR, because what you can do is you basically map a space mathematically and in engineering through sound, and then you can map how things are going to interact, and then that can change and you can apply characters to that. So I'll just play you an example of, this is something that's been coded by Felix Fair, and it just gives an example of spatial music. He has an architectural background in computation, but also in music as well. So. Oh, it's really cool. But yeah, you can see that like actually he's affected, like as he's moving in gesture in data as well, that it's affecting like the filters and things of the sound. So it's kind of coming in and then coming out, and then he's applied like really cool visuals along with it, which you can do in that sort of space. So you can do in like the VR or the AR space, because people are wearing things where they can see and hear things at the same time. So yeah, I'll just talk a little bit more about different platforms. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't have a big coding background or computational background. A lot of the stuff that I've done is with two-tone, which I'm going to give an example later. There's also things in Raspberry Pi, like Python, Sonic Pi, there's lots of information there. If you're really into coding, then there's things like Super Collider, Max MSP. You can do a lot more things there. There's also like Tone.js for if you're interested in JavaScript on websites. There's lots there basically. But there's also, if you're more on the producing side, there's a lot or composing side. There's a lot that you can do even without having that computational background. You can start off in two-tone, and also you can do things like just written out in score, or you can do things with some clever maths and engineering and just straight into your DAW, so like Ableton or Logic. So what kind of things might you want to map? Well, I've split this up broadly into kind of composition and songwriting. So things like tonality, harmony, melody, instrument, the kind of delivery that people might expect. Then production, so things like MIDI mapping, so like MIDI stands for musical instrument digital interface, I think. So it's basically just like a virtual musical instrument. Very basically, like what kind of sound wave you might want to use, a square wave, a saw wave, pitch, which is frequency, which we've talked about, and loudness, which is the amplitude of the wave. And then there's also things like more engineering effects that you can use. So where things pop out in the mix. So if you're interested in something spatial, do you want something that's going to pop out to the left, higher up? Do you want something to come forward out into both of the speakers? That's in stereo. Or do you want it to kind of sit further back and not really send that information to speakers? Do you want it to be quiet or loud? And then you can play a lot more with the actual character of the sound itself. Do you want something to be panned or sort of whirling around like in tremolo? And also like time-based effects, so things like reverb and echo can really give the feeling of a certain room, and also they can give the feeling of something feeling like underwater as well. Like if you apply a lot of it, it can really change the feeling of that sound. So there's loads of different stuff you can do, but one of the things that I would really say is if you're doing a project in something like this, really think about what is the story of the data that I'm trying to show, and therefore what kind of mapping would show that best. So there's so much stuff that you can do, but it's also really thinking about how you want to tell that story with the data that you have, and what you want audience to take from it, what you want them to get out of it. So with that in mind, I've given you guys more tasks. So this is actually two researchers at my current institute at the University of Cambridge. So the first one is a professor, and they work on killer T cells. So killer T cells basically go around and shoot virally infected cells and cells that multiply out of control, so cancer cells. And they do this with a lot of accuracy. And the second sort of potential project that we're going to work on is another researcher at my institute who works on understanding the different types of things that are on the cell surface and how that influences communication with other cells. So they look at different types of proteins and lipids, and then how that influences how those cells then kind of contact other cells. So what I'd really like to get you, and also people online, thinking about is if we had some data or a data set in this, how might we sonify it? How might we actually approach doing something like this? What parameters might we want to use? What kind of types of sonification might we want to use? So let's give ourselves a bit more time on this. So maybe like 7 minutes. Very specific, but I think that's good. Okay, so there's two projects, so think about them both. Go. Okay, I'm gonna come out and listen to some ideas. What are you guys thinking? Yeah, they do. I thought that too when I first learned about them, because they literally go around shooting things. It's hard to think of it not like that. Yeah. So you could then do a sound that represents shooting, couldn't you? Like literally a little pew pew pew. Yeah. What other things might you think about?
Your cells, like cancer cells, obviously they rapidly multiply and they don't die when they're supposed to die. So you might want a sound that represents a cancer cell, or like some sort of.
It does sound like a video game, doesn't it? It's like the killer T cells are killing something, and then the cancer cells are just multiplying and multiplying, and it's kind of like
the more you learn about the human body, the more it does seem like it's
yeah.
is like help all the helper cells and stuff. Because I mean the immune system's really fucking cool anyway, but that's besides the
And
point.
also have a think about the second one as well, because it's quite a different sort of idea, and how might you. There's no shooting in that one, I'm afraid. So
What I thought about the second one is like you could, you know when you kind of have those like flyover videos, like you could kind of almost as like a flyover as like you come to the cell surface, like you can hear all the different proteins and lipids have different sounds.
yeah. I was thinking it might be something like that.
Yeah.
But there's no right or wrong. It's just like, this is the great thing, is like, also you may find different data in there, and then think about, like, I had these guys talking about some different types of data that I hadn't considered, and I was thinking, yeah, that's really clever actually. You could do something with that.
So what do you mean with separated living like this surrounding?
Yeah, it's like on the surface, basically. Yeah, it's like, so generally what we mean by that is that like the cell surface, and then like, it's like the presentation of the surface. So there'll be like maybe one protein and then one lipid, and they're a bit different, and then they do different things, like in terms of one protein might sort of say to another cell, hey, like I'm a cell of this protein, and then that cell might be like, oh, hey, you know? So it's kind of like that sort of signaling, then it sets off a pathway of then like another cell being like, oh, like, you know? But that pathway will be different if it's a lipid, for example, because the lipid will set off a different pathway or a different set of events. But yeah, so there's different ways you can think about that data, because actually you could think of it just purely in terms of like the cell and having like a different protein and a different, and so the character of those two things and how that might sound.
Could you actually map the, I don't remember what makes up proteins.
Amino acids.
Amino acids.
Yeah.
Could you map like every amino acid to have like a certain pitch or something? And
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
as
you could.
Fly past each protein, it plays like a chord almost.
Yeah.
Of those amino acids. Because obviously each protein can have different.
You could, yeah, that would be a really cool way to do it. And again, that's why it's nice to talk to different people, because they think about things in a different way. So yeah, this is, I guess it's also similar to the Marcus Buehler's one, where he mapped the sequence of amino acids, and then that sort of showed differences in the structure of the protein.
Yeah.
So you could look at it like that, definitely.
And you could probably end up picking out which proteins are the similar proteins. As
Yeah, you could, because you could listen to it and hear, like, okay, there's this like section that sounds the same here and here, so maybe it's the same amino acids there.
It would be fun to come up with like a visual to kind of go along with that as well, where you
Yeah.
have like the surface of it, and if you could pick out like, oh right, I'm hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Right, I'm gonna just check with this group as well. What kind of thoughts have we had?
So you know, like when earthquake, like whenever I don't know how, like what's the science behind like the earthquake detector. However, I feel like every time when there's likely to be a small earthquake, it's gonna record it and to sort of make a beeping sound, and then if like because before like big earthquake is usually like multiple small ones,
Yeah.
so the beep sound can be like collective and then create a very like a sort of like a long beep.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I've got later on in this presentation I've got that exact idea, as in like another thing of how might you do this. But think about this particular, these two potential projects with biomedical data, because it's interesting thinking about different types of data set. And earthquake data is quite interesting because it's infrasound, so it's like much lower sound frequencies naturally. So it's not sound that we can hear, but it's technically sound data. But yeah, have a bit more of a think about specifically with these two. Yeah. we've got a minute left, so quickly. Thank you, Jen. Also, if there's anything online that people are coming up with, Jen, let me know. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah, let's, cool, let's talk about it, and I'd love to hear some people's thoughts. So maybe we could start with this group. What were you thinking?
I think the problem I had, ironically, was visualizing what the data would look like.
Yeah, okay.
But probably for both of them. But yeah, for the first one, something like, I guess, yeah. How could you use it in a similar way that the example that you used earlier with the COVID thing, like to detect someone who had cancer versus someone who didn't? I guess the problem with that is you'd have to have somebody that didn't have cancer as the kind of to what you compare it to, which I guess would just be silence. I don't know. And then for the second one, again, yeah, there's a program that I've used for like making as a sort of starting point for making music. It's called like Euclideans, where you have like these two shapes, like a triangle and a square, and they're kind of spinning. And then when you move them together, and every time the edges hit each other, it makes a noise. So I don't know if that would work for something like this, where you would have like the different types of proteins or whatever it is represented by different waveforms, for example.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
And then every time they like interact, it creates a noise.
Yeah, I think the more obvious one for this second one is exactly that, in that you create different characters for a protein and a lipid. It's a bit like the Uruk-hai theme, but maybe not as battly. But like, yeah, as in that you have different characters, and then they then sort of undergo different communication because of that. So they then interact with different cells from that theme. So you could like present that theme in music, and then maybe that has a different response, like a call and response or something. What other ideas do people have? I'd love to hear some in some of these groups. Should we start with this group?
So similar to the other group, we first started by trying to guess like how we would break down the data, like what that would look like. And I think after that, we started to think more about like what was our goal with the data.
Yeah.
So like on the one hand, research, the most important parts would be like consistency for discovering patterns. So Marissa suggested like as a way to interpret multidimensional data that graphs would maybe not be as useful for.
Yeah.
And then we thought like another could be sort of an aesthetic experience of it. What that would be for, we weren't quite sure, but like maybe just as a way to appreciate how much the body does that we're totally unaware of.
Yeah.
In that sense, it would be more like of a cinematic goal. So,
I like that. Yeah, something a bit more mysterious that we're not really sure of yet.
So that's sort of what we were talking about.
Okay, cool. I'd love to hear. I know that the group behind you had a really cool idea, so I would love them to share it.
Who wants it?
I think, Jen, try this group first. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I kind of focus more on the second one mainly because that was the one I kind of get my head around more. So initially I kind of thought that you kind of have like a fly through almost of going between the proteins on the end of the cell, and then I kind of wondered, well, I've got all these proteins all made up of different amino acids. So if you assign like a pitch or a note to every different amino acids, then as you fly past each protein, then you have a different chord playing, and then you'll be able to pick up on like the same chord because it will sound exactly the same essentially. And as you sort of fly past it, where you just hear the different proteins.
Yeah. Do you two want to share the one for the first one? Because I thought that was really cool. Yeah.
So I think it was.
Oh yeah, it was broad. Yeah. Okay.
We kind of said we thought it was like a shooting game.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for the first one, so because you have the killer T cells, we kind of thought of maybe I said like space invaders when you have
Yeah. So you have a little like. These are,
For some reason, I also think about the visual.
Mhm.
I do think about like a shooting game, like
Yeah.
arcade one. That's just how we thought of.
Yeah, you could have an auditory icon, couldn't you? Because every time a killer T cell took down a virally infected cell, you could literally have like a laser shooting or something. Like, why not? You know. But yeah, I do think it's important to think like with the visuals as well. Even in data sonification, it does often have, as we've talked about, more impact when it also goes along with visuals. It's just that it also can have an impact in making something into sound as well, and often people don't think about that. So yeah, definitely really thinking about the visuals and stuff is really worthwhile as well. I don't know if these groups kind of banded together or, yeah, it was just sort of all a bit, that's fine. Cool, okay, thanks Jen. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a bit about an example that I've made, just so you can see and hear it and just get a bit of a feel for it. Generally, the sonification process goes like this, but you have a set of data, and then you put that into a platform. So I use two-tone because I don't have such a computational background, but I had to put the data into an Excel file, and I had to use quantitative data, so numerical data. That then spit out an audio at the end, which I could drop into Ableton Sampler. I know we've got one Ableton user here, but basically, if you're a producer, then you can put it into like a virtual instrument into your software. And then one of the things that we've talked about all along also is what is the story that you're really trying to convey with that data, and therefore like what kinds of mapping and sounds and stuff do you want to come out of that data. So here is something that I worked on. So I did a bit of independent research and found that on the NHS website, there are 4 ways for queer people to have children. So I took those 4 ways, which are qualitative data, so they're described in words, and I coded that into numbers, really basic. So there are 4 choices, and I dropped this Excel file into two-tone, okay? So what we can see here is what two-tone looks like inside. So you can see that there are 4 things that have come through in sound. I chose a double bass. I thought this is quite jolly, this data, like there's 4 ways for queer people to have children. And I also put it into C major, which is like major tonality, so it's quite a nice, jolly tonality. And then I also wanted a bit of an arpeggio to cycle through chords, to cycle through the chords that it's created. So it sounded like you could hear these choices like continuously cycling through, okay? So this is what it sounded like. This is literally in two-tone what the different ways you can have children on the NHS sounds like. Okay, quite nice, I think. But yeah, so I took that and then I basically put it into Ableton Sampler, and I'll talk a bit more about the rest of this project, because the real reason why I decided to do this was that there was an article in The Guardian a couple of months ago that was basically saying that a lesbian couple had actually been discriminated against, and it's because there are lots of barriers that people face to have children if you're queer, because it depends on your location and how much finance you have and all of these kind of things. So I then, thinking about the story that I was telling with that data, I didn't want it to sound very jolly anymore. And I thought a lot more about how could I make it sound a bit more uncomfortable in the music. So I did a lot of that with tonality. So what I did was I took that double bass, the jolly C major, and I put that against like some diminished chords stuff, so it sounded very scrunchy. And I also created something binaural, which is sort of things that come all the way around your head. So it kind of felt very sort of like washy. So this is something from the EP that I'm going to release later in a couple of months' time. You can just hear the change in that data, basically, from the story that I'm trying to tell with it. hear it. Yeah. So, I mean, and I wanted to create something as well that was musical enough that I could just release it regardless, but it's there for people to find if they want to, basically. So again, it comes down to what are you trying to do with the project? What are you trying to make? For me, it's quite fun to come up with lots of different, like, sort of playful games and creative ways that I can do things in music. So a little sonification stuff was quite an interesting thing to try out. But, you know, it depends on what you're trying to do. If I was making something at the university, or if I was doing something funded by Arts Council or a research grant in public engagement, I would also really need to be thinking a lot more about the audience group, particularly. So what they would be taking from it, and also the balance of having something that's very accurate. So you want something, scientists often want things to feel really accurate. They want the data to be represented in its original way. And then artists tend to want to interpret that data and have it be more engaging and make it have more impact. And then, you know, thinking about your audience group, which I know this group did, but also thinking about who is actually listening to this. If it's another scientist that needs to use that data to understand something that they're working on, then maybe you don't need something to sound really enjoyable and pleasant to listen to. It needs to be a lot more functional so people can just hear the patterns in that music. Or maybe you're working in accessibility in certain groups, so you need to think about that. So yeah, lots to think about. But with that in mind, this is actually a project that at Goldsmiths, so there's I guess it's come out of some of the research groups that are there already. There's a company called SoundOut who've just received hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of funding from the research councils to basically map the DNA, emotional DNA of music and what people are actually taking from it. So I thought we could have a really quick go at this. If we listen to this sonification of the Bubble Nebula, so I just want to know, when you listen to this, what types of words you would associate with it. And we'll just have like 2 minutes on this. Cool. Go. I genuinely think NASA makes some of the nicest sonifications out there. Like, they're just so pleasant to listen to. But yeah, in fact, maybe we don't even need to discuss in groups, but if people can just, if there are any particular words in here, for example, that people feel like...
You'll need to repeat them, because at the moment that mic is failing, so we're just going to need you to repeat what the speaker's saying.
Okay, sure, yeah. I will repeat your answers. But yeah, if you could tell me first, what kind of words do you think might describe what we've just listened to? What did you take from it? Dreamy, nice. Dreamy, yeah, okay. Oh, you're going to say the same? Spacey.
Maybe, but actually I'm not sure how much these are connected to the music and how much to the theme that I use it all the time. I think it would be interesting to like listen to the sound just like without knowing what it's related to.
Yeah, so exactly. So so the visuals and the sound together basically gave you the sort of feel of it being spacey. So if you listen to that just purely by itself. But the thing is, it's a sonification of that space data. So it's kind of, I guess it's okay to exist together as well. And it's okay to take something spacey from it. I mean, if you took something like completely different from it, I would be really curious, where that would come from. But yeah, it's, does anyone else have any words that they would associate? Childlike. That's interesting. What do you think that is? Is that coming from? Yeah. Do you think it was like some of the sounds in particular that was doing that? That was giving you that feeling? Yeah, it's like the sort of chimes and stuff almost. Okay, interesting. What about, did anyone else have any? Curious. Yeah. I think so. I could get that. Yeah, I could get curious. What was that? Ethereal, nice, yeah. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting, and people have this a lot with songs, but people take very different things from music and from songs. So it can be quite difficult to have something that actually people take a coherent sort of story from. So one of the interesting things that this company is doing is selling a lot of this information to brands that are looking to kind of build certain qualities about them. Like if there was a brand that wanted to be charming, then you'd want people to be listening to stuff and kind of associate that quality with that music, as well as with the visuals. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. But it is important to also think about, I have seen some sonifications where people have said, oh, I tried to do this, this, and this, and have this impact. And then I've listened to it and felt like I've taken something completely different from it. So it is really important to think about your audience and evaluate what people are taking from that sonification as well. And if you ever do anything, projects and stuff in museums, this is a big thing too. So like it's a really big thing in these kind of like public spaces. They'll want to test that the museum public are kind of getting what the impact that you want out of it. So here is an interesting exhibition that I worked on. So in my role prior to what I'm doing now, I was in a deep earth research team, and I basically worked with a team that used earthquakes to understand what's happening deep inside the earth, and we turned all of that information into an exhibition, and we took that to the public, and we did a lot of evaluation around that to make sure that a lot of that very complex language from understanding things at a PhD or postdoc level was coming through into the exhibition. So they had 3 core messages that we were trying to work with. So the Earth is more than a set of simple layers. Material actually deep inside the Earth is moving and changing with time, and that it's the earthquake, the seismic wave earthquake data that actually provides the eyes or the visuals for us to be able to see inside the Earth. So I'll just really quickly show you that this is some of the stuff that they worked on. I just think this is fascinating. So this is actually, they uncovered these huge supercontinent structures that basically lie in between the mantle, which is deep in the Earth, and then also on the outer core. And they don't really know what they are, but they know that they have different densities and they have different temperatures and things because the earthquake data moves differently throughout the Earth. So we turn this into an exhibit, and I just want to show you what that looks like. So each time an earthquake happens, you see the waves. This was all coded in Python, by the way, if anyone's interested. So yeah, you see the waves, and then as it hits the seismometer, this is real earthquake data as well. You can see it recorded on the seismometer, and then this was, someone also made us all into cartoons, which was really fun. But yeah, this was one of the team in the cartoons, and he basically was saying that he uses this data to understand a lot more about what kind of temperature and densities and things might be underneath the Earth. So the final task that I want people to just really quickly think about is how could we sonify this data? And I will also add in that seismic waves are infrasound, so they allow us to see deep inside the Earth, but they're actually really low frequency sound waves. They're just too low for us to hear currently. So final task, couple of minutes. Go.
Is it called one of those things that you can put on the ground that picks up the movement of the
Seismometer. Yeah. So it depends. So if seismometer record those kind of much lower frequency seismic waves, you can get other like recording devices. You can get, I think there's things like hydrophones and stuff that you can put to record things underwater and stuff. So I think it depends on, there's lots of recording devices basically, but I also think it depends on the waves that you're trying to record, and where those, you know, if you're trying to record underwater, you also need something that's waterproof. So like, I don't know if a seismometer, how easy that would be to just like record sound or that sort of level. Yeah, there probably are various different things. Yeah. Yeah, there's some really cool projects out there, honestly. There's lots of stuff. If you want to find it online, it's all there. But yeah, just, in fact, I feel like, let's just, does anyone have any ideas? We'll just shout it out. And I'll repeat. Yeah. Does anyone, yeah.
I was just thinking of a section of the Earth, and try to translate the speed at which the wave is moving into a frequency.
Yeah, so okay, so thinking about the physics.
You have materials with different densities. Like the wave would be moving with a changing speed. Like the speed of the wave would change.
So mapping the speed of the wave, mapping that parameter to a sound that changes as it moves through different materials, basically. Yeah, that would be really interesting. Does anyone have any other thoughts?
I mean, I guess if it's just infrasound, then could you map the actual just waves to the rate if you hear it?
Yeah, you could. Yeah. That would be like the easiest way to do it, I think, is to just pitch it all up in frequency to keep that same structure to it and then just pitch it up. Yeah, you could. I mean, if you wanted it, again, it depends how you wanted it to sound. That will give you the most accurate sounding of like that real data. If you want it to sound more musical, then doing other stuff with it is like would be useful as well. Does anyone else have any final thoughts? Otherwise, I'll go on to questions.
Okay, I'm going to see if the mic is behaving.
Is it doing something?
It might not be. It looks like it has.
It looks like it.
Let's try. Yeah, this is interesting.
Okay, I think this is working again now, so I'm just going to stand here. Thank you.
No, thank
Firstly.
you.
Yeah. Could we get a quick round of applause for Jess? I'm just going to rove the mic. So do people have burning questions? Don't be shy. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
There's a couple of burning.
What data sets lend themselves well to data sonification? And maybe what's an example of a data set that you wanted to sonify but couldn't figure out how to get it to work?
Oh, yeah, okay. So data sets that lend themselves well are so emotional data, data that changes over time. So sound is temporal, like it has a time aspect to it. So data sets that collect very small changes over time lend themselves really nicely. Like the very first one we listened to with the climate data that was slowly changing over time, and it had that real impact. In terms of data sets that really that are very hard, I think that you can get, so if you ever play with two-tone, they actually allow you to drop in various different types of data sets. And the UN has lots of interesting data that it's like open source that you can play with. It's like really rich in terms of you'd have to be quite specific about really honing in on what each data or data set was representing. I also think that generally with the stuff that I've done, because I've used two-tone, it needs to be quantitative data. So quantitative data generally works quite well. I think you can do stuff with qualitative data, but it's harder because you're trying to represent the feeling of that word, and that a lot of people might take very different things from a word. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
still, I'm not convinced this mic is working, so you might have to just repeat.
Just keep repeating, okay. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody.
It's fine. Was there another question over here? Yeah.
How do you make the choices when you have a data set and you? I guess that I'm trying to get to is the connection between having the data and then choosing like how you want it to sound.
Yeah.
Because I guess with visualization, it's like it's always accurate. You know what I mean? Like there's no subjectivity to it. Whereas when you're doing the sonification, like the reason that the first one worked well because it was accurate, but it was also it also created the uneasy feeling as well. So yeah, how do you kind of make those choices?
So I would actually say that personally I would say that both sound and visualization can be both accurate and interpretive, like depending on what type of, sorry, repeating the question for everyone online, but it was along the lines of sorry, can you repeat the question to me? This is pretty much.
How do you make choices?
Yeah.
When you have a data set, and how do you decide
Right.
analysis
Okay.
what you want it to sound like?
So the question was, how do you decide what kinds of parameters to map and what kind of musical sounds do you want? I mean, I would say that a lot of that is driven by or should be driven by audience, like who is going to be listening to it and what you want them to take from it. So that's why a lot of things are done, like if you mentioned in museum spaces, it's why there's a lot of evaluation. I mean, just to go back to that slide, but we actually did, on the visualization, we did a huge amount of evaluation with audiences around how people would associate things like the temperature of the Earth, because the weird thing is that in space, and other things, that blue is like hot and red and stuff is cold and stuff. So there were things like around that, and actually that's what we went for here, that like in the middle of the Earth, where it's white, it's actually the hottest. And then at the outside is red, because we asked public, and we found that the vast majority of public understood it like that. But you could also see that, like, if a lot of people have just been using taps, that they might think of red as hot and blue as cold. So it's, yeah, I think that's where things like asking general public are important. I think probably without like any sort of external audience involved, then there's also just trying different things and seeing the impact that it has, what you like. I mean, if it's just a project that you're like, the stuff that I was doing, it's just a project that I'm going to release, it's kind of, I guess, most important that I'm happy with how it sounds and how it's sort of represented. But I also then have to understand that someone might take something quite different away from that project. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think there are also some parameters that lend themselves better for pieces of data. So some things like pitch can be quite exacting, but you could, so because it's frequency, you could map any kind of mathematically, you could map that across, and you get all kinds of pitch. But if you wanted it to be more musical, you'd have to map it into the 12 semitone scale that would a lot of people would maybe more used to listening to. So it kind of depends on like who your audience is, I think. Yeah. Okay.
I was wondering what your first into Sonification project was, and maybe what the hardest things were about it when you first started.
I think so. Yeah. Sorry, repeat that for everyone. That was, what is your first data sonification project, and what was the sort of things that I found really hard about it? So I think for me, the things that I personally found difficult. So my first project was actually the one that I showed in the presentation, which is the ways that queer people can have children. I think one of the things that I actually found difficult was the external software And because I don't have the coding background, I started off using two-tone, but then I had to like email the person that made two-tone quite a few times because I was having a similar problem to what you were saying, what we were talking about basically, where I had a data set and I was trying to get the right data almost to basically sonify, because I had so much going on in that data set and I was trying to upload that onto two-tone, and then I didn't understand why I wasn't getting the sound and stuff that I wanted from it. So that was a bit tricky, but then after a bit of a to and fro with the person that made two-tone, I basically understood what it was trying to do, and I made everything into numerical data. So I think it depends on, like, I think for me the limiting factor is maybe like my coding skills and the understanding around that part of the project, that if something were to go wrong in that, like where, you know, then what would I do to problem solve that? Because I have a lot more of a background in music, like those parts of the project came much more naturally, because I could kind of feel like, okay, I want to try this tonality, I want to try this mapping. So maybe there's a lot more scope for people to like collaborate across, you know, and appreciate that people have different expertise. So like maybe there are people that are much stronger at coding, and then there are people that are much stronger at music, and you don't have to be an expert in everything. Although that's certainly the way in production these days, isn't it? It's trying to like, yeah, it feels like it's very much like you have to have your fingers in all of the pies. But yeah, did anyone? Yeah, one more.
I was just curious about how the coronavirus strain, how did that data set look like?
Which one? Sorry, the
coronavirus strain that was sonified. Like how did
the coronavirus strain? Yeah, that's interesting. So because oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so the question was, what did the data set around the coronavirus protein look like? Because proteins are made up of individual amino acids, it's actually the order and the sequence of that amino acid. And there are like 20, okay, now you're really testing my biology skills, but there are 20 amino acids that make up every protein in the body. And it's a bit like an alphabet making up all of the words that we use, right? So it's pretty incredible that we have these 20 amino acids that do all of this stuff. So there are like, I guess there would be 20 different sounds, and then depending on where, how that sequence is, then it would, so the data set would look like, for each amino acid, it would be, oh God, oh, I don't want to say amino acids. I feel like that's too rusty for me. But yeah, it just would look like those individual amino acids, and then you would take that and sonify that. But you could, I think that's a great example of where actually, that would be a huge data set, then actually coding is such an advantageous skill to have, because to manage things like big data, having a bit more sort of like coding background or understanding of that sort of large data set. I mean, the other thing is the example I gave, I picked, you know, four or five things just to sort of show what was possible, really. But if you create something where you start to have like a really large data set, then having some coding skills is really valuable, I would say. Yeah, so, yeah.
Okay, we have a couple of questions from
Yeah.
the stream.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
Ding those over. We've actually got some people who are answering each other's questions on the stream, which is quite funny.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
I'm actually just going to come over to you and shout,
Okay.
so that you don't have to repeat again. Nadine asked, have you ever tried turning existing sounds into data and then sonifying that again?
Okay, turning existing sounds into data. So this is a bit like the Spotify thing, isn't it? I mean, I haven't, but there's no reason why you couldn't. There's no reason why you couldn't do a project like that. I mean, it could be a very interesting project. There's a great resource called the Data Sonification Archive. if you're interested to look and see any other projects, so something like what Nadine is suggesting, then you could, there's a high chance that if one existed, it would be on there. Typically, there are data that tends to get sonified more, and things like the art subjects and stuff, I guess if you start with art and then you're making it into art again, there's maybe like less of that happening, but there's no reason why you couldn't do it. I haven't tried it, but like it sounds like a really cool project. Yeah.
I've tried it before.
You have? Okay, fab. Oh, we've got someone that's tried it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I grab the...
Yeah, do you want to take one look?
You have two options. You
Yeah.
you should probably just run a suggestion, shout at her.
Okay. Okay.
So what I did is I got some pre-recorded some samples as my background music. Then I put them into Text Designer and make some visual arts at the same time. Then I use piezo and Arduino, grab some data
cool.
from my guitar
Yeah.
when I'm playing solo. So my background would be generated by the data from my guitar.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm playing my solo, the background sound would be like nice, noisy.
Yeah.
And when I'm like not playing the solo, the other tracks will play.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. So it's using piezo and Arduino as your sonification platform there, process. Yeah.
And Touch Designer.
And touch designer. Yeah. Cool.
That's all.
Really cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. One more.
So Inner Child is asking, do you think sonifying acoustic data would work, like to group or highlight some specific frequencies? Does that make
Is
sense?
this for a particular project? Or like, because, I mean, so again, it comes down to, what I would say about that is, there's no reason why it wouldn't work, but really think about the story that you're trying to tell with that data and why you would want to use that data to do that. So that you can do something just for the sake of doing it, and that's fine, just to test if it's possible. But I would just say that if you're trying to, generally speaking in art and things, people have like an intention with what they're trying to do and an idea of like how to have an impact with that. So maybe just thinking a bit more along those lines too. Like you can definitely do what you're suggesting, but also thinking about like why you would want to do that and what you would hope different people would take from it, if that's helpful. Yeah, one more? Yeah.
What's the weirdest data set you've come across?
Oh, that's a great question. What is the weirdest data set that I've come across? I mean, there's a project that I haven't shared. I didn't go into a lot of detail in the presentation. It's not really weird, but it's really fun. And it's someone has sonified the real-time changes in Wikipedia. So you see, like, there's this. It's called. I think the website's called Listen to Hatnote. I do have it on here. We could really quickly look at it if you like, because it is really fun. I just find this really fun, this project. So I think the additions to Wikipedia come as like a bell, and then the subtractions come as strings or something. And then there's each time a new user joins to edit things, there's like a huge swell, and you can like welcome them in the chat as well. And people are literally editing all kinds of weird stuff. So like it just pops up. Let's just enable sound. Oh, okay, that was great. Let's try that again. Berlusconi, hard to swallow. Try to enable sound again. It's just really weird. Just like one of those fun, quirky projects that people have done just for the sake of it, kind of thing. Yeah, that's a good question. So, you've listened to a total of 49 edits. Green circles show edits from unregistered contributors. Purple circles mark edits performed by automated bots. So it's built with D3 and Howler.js, so JavaScript. And it's available on GitHub if anyone wants to sonify another form of Wikipedia or something quirky. But yeah, very cool project.
The larger the edit, the deeper the note, it says at the bottom, which is quite interesting.
Yes, yeah. And also, the larger oh, someone's just joined. So I think you can welcome them. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. It's a really fun, like, weird project. But basically, you can make, if you're imaginative enough, data exists everywhere. So you can create or find or make your own, like, data set out of something that you think is weird, and then code it and make sound out of it. So I'm just listening to someone else joining. But yeah, like, it's there's a lot that you can do. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're probably going to round it there.
Yeah.
Hold on. We're still watching this back later. I'm going to come and shout at Jess again.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
hi.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay, gang, thanks so much for joining us today for this We Move session 10. Just in terms of future events, we will be announcing. We're just literally about to announce our next one, which is with Romera Abrams, who is a top vocal production specialist. She's worked with Adele, with Little Mix, with some incredible names. And every single one of these seminars is free. You can sign up for your free spot on musichackspace.com. We will be doing Romera's session at Tileyard Studios, which is near King's Cross. It's quite an easy walk. So we're about to shout about it all over social media because we just got the confirmation through for it. It will be next Friday. So I think it's Friday the 6th of May. Romera is generally a lovely human as well, so do come and meet her because she's incredible and very knowledgeable. So that's the next one. We've got 25 of these altogether. So we're on number 10. There's another 9 that you can access for free on our YouTube channel. So if you just look for just put Music Hackspace into YouTube, you will find every single one. And you can watch them back, including this one, in case you missed anything, or you're like, oh, what was that thing that Jess said? You can just go and have a look. And we will be continuing to run these IRL and URL, so both streaming and live, all the way through to the summer. So do keep an eye out. We have just booked a slew of amazing ones, so do keep an eye on our social media for those announcements, and also it's musichackspace.org, not .com.
Yeah.
Get it right. Do keep an eye on the website for those announcements so that you can book your spots as well. In the meantime, where can you find Jess?
So I'm on socials. I'm on Twitter. I've got a website. So if you want to follow my music, I'm at Island Fox UK. On Instagram and Twitter and stuff. If you want to follow more of my academic mumblings on Twitter, then I'm at J.A. Bartlett, I think.
J.A. Bartlett.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. And if you're concerned about finding those, you'll be able to find them on the Music Hackspace socials because we've been tagging her in everything.
Yeah.
So, because we're good at that.
Yeah.
So that's it for this evening. Like I said, kind of follow up on YouTube and follow up on our website to find out more about the sessions that are coming up. And thanks to you in the room, and thanks to you on the stream for joining us. You've all been great. Have a lovely evening.